So I'm Valine Laibuta, the communications assistant at the Comms Avenue. I will be your moderator today for the webinar where we will be discussing effective crisis communications. So I hope you're all ready to learn. We have such amazing speakers with us today. And I'll just need everyone to kind of use a reaction in the chat. Just let us know you're dialed in, introduce yourself, let us know where you're based in Nairobi, what your role is, so that we know that you're all dialed in. You can use the chat, you can use reactions like a thumbs up to let us know you're dialed in. Thank you, Zephon. Welcome to the webinar. Dorothy, thank you. Eva. So welcome, guys. Let me begin by introducing our amazing speakers who will be taking us through this topic of crisis communications. I know it's an area that most of us struggle with. It's a bit complex. So yeah, our first speaker is Jacob Ouma. Jacob, who has his camera on, is the Group Managing Director at AdMedia Communications, which is a leading communications agency in Kenya and South Africa. He has over 15 years of experience in the industry, and he oversees AdMedia's operations across Kenya and South Africa, executing strategic communications campaigns, events, media plans, with very vast clients in the NGO, corporate, and government sectors. He's highly regarded for his expertise in building organizational capacity through training programs that enhance communication, media relations, and public relations. So Jacob, if you can unmute and say hi to everyone today.
Hi, Val. Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you everyone for joining me today. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and for people to make time after tear gas the whole day to be in such a forum, it's quite amazing.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you for making the time today to join us. Our second speaker is Eunice Waweru. So this lovely lady, Eunice, with her camera on, is an experienced communications and public relations professional who is skilled in client management, media relations, crisis communications, and brand reputation management. She is currently the client management and media relations officer at Glasshouse PR, which is a communications agency. She excels in developing strategic communication plans, building relationships with the media and influencers, and securing positive coverage for her clients. Her background includes roles in the NGO space, education institutions, and PR agencies. She has a wonderful track record of achieving effective results. So Eunice, if you can kindly unmute your mic and say hi to everyone.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. Happy to learn together with the team. Yes, I am looking forward to really interact and really engage on the agile, I can call it the agile communication space that we are in currently, and that which is shaping even our space in the communication field. So thank you, Valen, thank you, Jacob, and everybody who is here, that we may learn together and interact. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice, for joining us on this panel today. So I think we'll hop into the topic of effective crisis communications. But before our panel gives us an overview of what crisis communication is, can I throw it into the audience and ask you guys, what do you think crisis communications is about? You can unmute, switch on your camera. I don't know if you guys want me to pick on you like our lecturers used to do during COVID times. I don't know if Jade is available. Okay, so
Hi. Sorry. Sorry, what were you asking?
Can you tell us what crisis communications is?
I can tell from my understanding, it's communication centered on um yeah. So basically, oh, the English is not Englishing. So it's basically like communications and protocols that are put in place to help organizations navigate situations such as crises, like like situations like that have taken place today, and also situations that pose a risk to their business reputation.
Thank you, Jade. I think that's a very good explanation of crisis communications. Allow me to throw the same question to Jacob to explain to us what crisis communications and why it's something so vital. It's a vital skill strategy that we all need to learn as practitioners.
Actually, for Jane, the English has Englished well, and she has described it so well, and that is exactly what it is. The management of situations that may pose a risk to your operations in your organization, and the management of the comms that accompany them. So, in essence, in a simple terms, that is what it is. I always tell people that if you don't do crisis communication, you will have the crisis of communication. And you usually don't want to get to that. You don't want the lack of crisis communication to lead to a crisis in communication and a communication crisis, together with the crisis already that you are handling as an organization. So yes, it is the managing of that communication during the time of crisis. And it's always very important to know the difference between the crisis communication and crisis management. And I will get to that. Maybe I can throw it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Eunice, maybe if you have anything else to add and why it is so crucial for organizations to have a crisis communications plan.
Thank you, Valin. I think Jacob and Candice have done it, and for sure it is that ensuring that we have the right tools to do this, because nobody is immune, no company, no business, no brand is immune to crisis. So it's all a matter of always being prepared. It's like the scouts or the girl guides motto, always be prepared. So I think that's the same attitude for any company, because crisis can come anytime, and we look at some examples and see why. And I think now, as you have said, why do we need this crisis communication? It's because, one, we care about our brands, we care about our reputation out there, and so having the right communication for the crisis, it will help us reduce the reputation damage in case it comes. And also, if you have communication, if we have the right crisis communication or plan, we will be able also to make the right decisions, because sometimes when you're in panic or things are happening so fast, if we do not communicate during that season also, we will make the wrong decisions, and that can have a really bad impact on the company, on how we are perceived out here. And remember, as in the PR field, our perception matters out here, our image matters. So yes, that's why we need to have clear crisis communication. Back to you, Val, or anybody who'd like to add something on that. Valin, sorry.
Thank you so much, Eunice. I think you have captured it well. Crisis communications is so important for us to manage risks and the company's image. So I think you have captured that well. So just to throw it back to you, Eunice, what are some of the key elements in developing a robust crisis communications plan?
Thank you. Because when we are doing a plan, we definitely need, one, you need the right team in place. remember what Jacob has said. If you don't have a crisis communication, you may now be solving your own lack of crisis communication being the crisis. So one, you need to have a team on ground. We need to know who is speaking. Number two, we need to know what are they speaking. That is now the key messages. For example, when we are communicating, one, we need to know who is the person speaking. Number two, what are they saying? Do we have the guidelines that will guide our key messages? That's something we need to have in plan also. And then we also need to, another element we need to know is, how are we going to measure our success? How are we, when depending on the response, how are we going to measure that we are doing the right thing? Because sometimes if everybody is talking, doing things, we may think that is crisis communication, but that may be more chaos. So for me, those are some of the principal elements in crisis comms that we really need to have in place, so that we are monitoring how we are going. We are monitoring the temperatures as we go by. So those principles don't change often. They may keep, what do I say? They may keep morphing, but the key principles still remain. We need to have a spokesperson in place. We need to know what are they saying. We also need to know, to measure what is it that we are saying. And now to add to it is that we need to do these things in real time. We also need to know the timing, so that we are not late. You see, now it's just like news, how if time is past, if you're talking about now the finance bill now, maybe you're giving your commendations, and this is too late. It is right, it is okay, but then it's too late. So you need also to have the real-time updates for everyone, whether internally or externally. And finally, you need also to know, is it a crisis? Just because somebody said something negative, does it turn into a crisis? So we need to ask all those questions, all those elements of crisis communication, so that we make the right decisions. And never forget to always show care when you're doing this.
Yeah, I like what you just said on we need to identify if this is a crisis or not. So, Jay, and what are some of the elements we need to create a robust plan?
Sorry, have you thrown a question at me? My
Yes. So yeah, Eunice had mentioned we need to understand what is a crisis. So I think I can even see a question here leading into that from George that says, what qualifies as a crisis to warrant an action or implementation of our crisis comm strategies?
Let me just respond to that. The first most important thing to do in developing a crisis communication plan, it's usually to come up with crisis scenarios. As an organization, you have to outline all the types of crises that can hit you. Then, once you have that, you outline the hierarchy, the communication channels, and the hierarchy in that organization, no matter how small it is, or even a company. And once you have done that, you start looking at every scenario separately. Then, in those scenarios, you categorize them in the level of intensity. Is it moderate? Is it minimally intense? Is it intense? Is it highly intense? Right now, we are seeing a highly intense crisis scenario, yet it graduated from a minimally intense one, because first it started with a consultation with the companies during the public participation of the finance bill. And the views were given and they were ignored at that point. So the crisis moved from intense to highly intense so fast. Now it has left not only the media to now the streets, and everyone is part of that. I'll give you another example. When the president went to the US for the state visit, it was if his team would have envisioned the crisis that would arise from that trip, they would be able to come up with a plan that would address the issues and concerns that would come out of it. Because now he came with bag of goodies. but people only remember the jet and the cost of the flight. And what did they do in managing it? They decided to throw the national carrier under the bus, creating another crisis. Now, all of a sudden, they have to compete on who will take pictures besides the national carrier to show that they actually care. But it just shows you that they didn't think out the plan well. They didn't sit through and think in terms of the crisis scenarios that can come out of it and what is the plan of communication. So the moment you come with a communication plan, you look at the messaging. What are you going to say out there? You don't say and then you ask yourself, oops, what did I say? You have at the point of crisis scenarios where you are enlisting them down, you have to curate the messaging that will accompany every scenario. So that is how you go about it and determine what will require to be escalated to the crisis comms team's leader or what can be handled at the departmental level. So those are what will determine how much. The moment you do your crisis scenarios and you do the crisis mapping and you formulate a crisis comms team and look at the level of communication channels and seniority, you will know what is handled at what level. So that one is if your organization is the one under crisis. What if you're an agency supporting organization during a crisis? Right now, we are supporting various organizations in this continent in very big crises that they found themselves in because of lack of a crisis comms plan. I would start with one organization which is a regional economic community. You all know ECOWAS. You know what is happening with the announcement of the exit of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. They contracted us to develop for them a crisis comms framework. And the first thing we looked at is how they handled the communication prior to these countries announcing their exits. And you would see, for example, when Burkina Faso did their coup d'etat and Mali, ECOWAS made a pronouncement saying that our standby forces are on alert and we are ready to negotiate. You don't mention standby forces and then talk about negotiation later. So this statement of standby forces was like a call to war. And all these countries that already had coup d'etat now found something to galvanize their following around the messaging that ECOWAS had adopted. So when we came on board and developed the framework and reviewed it, we realized that there has to be scenarios where you think through the scenarios and the impact of the same. And then how do you monitor after you've made the pronouncements? Do you monitor to see what is the effect that is having on the ground and the people and the nationalities that you're dealing with? I have many other examples across the continent, even in the country that we are dealing with right now, both for multinational organizations and local ones. And it always goes back to the same thing. Is there a crisis communication plan? Do you have a crisis communication team? Have you done your crisis scenarios, mapping them? And then do you have a channel of verification? If a crisis happens, how do you verify that? Then when you verify that crisis, that it is true indeed, how are you going to package that information? Who said it, where, what time? You have all the facts. Then you report it to the higher team. And the crisis team, communication team sits down to curate the messaging around it. Remember, I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between crisis management and crisis communication. Crisis communication is part of crisis management, but it is not crisis management. Management goes back to what your basic and primary trade is. For example, if you have a governance problem or a policy problem, it is changing that policy that will resolve the crisis. It's not communication that will resolve it. You have to deal with that policy that is bringing problems. You could see, like when they had a PG meeting at State House, they had to drop or put some propositions on what should be changed in the bill, in the finance bill. Those are the type of measures you have to take to manage the crisis. Then you handle the comms part of it. So you find, like, if it is a fire accident in a factory, it is the security, safety team, and all those that have to handle it before the comms is done or while the comms is done. So crisis communication is what messages are you sending out there when you are trying to manage the crisis. I remember when we had just launched in South Africa our office 3 months ago, and we were at OR Tambo Airport, Uh, KQ had already checked us in, and we were at the tunnel waiting to enter the flight, and nothing was moving. So we stayed there like 30 minutes. No one has said anything. People are seated in a tunnel that has no air conditioning. They've gotten tired. They've started sitting down. And I asked myself, what is this that we are doing? So I went back and I asked the lady who was serving us that, have you noticed that we've been there for 40 minutes and no one has said anything? So I started by asking, what is the problem? Yes, they told me, oh, it's communication between our gadget and the flight, the control tower that could not happen. So there's no way the flight can leave until that. I asked, have you communicated that? Because we love the KQ, we love our carrier. You just need to tell us that and then plan on how we are going to wait. We don't need to wait in the tunnel yet. Seats are out there. Let's go back to the seats, manage the communication, and then handle the crisis. They did that, and people were relaxed finally. I got my flight 12 hours later. But you can imagine if I was waiting for 12 hours in the tunnel, we would have moved from a crisis of communication to a humanitarian crisis, like I also had in another experience, still with KQ in Ghana, where the AC was not working. And I asked them, like, please, can you disembark everyone, sort out whatever is happening? And they took it personally. They were like, do you want to disembark alone? We can arrange that. I told them, no, I need you to disembark everyone because people are sweating. People are already starting to ask for water. No one is telling us what is wrong with this. Just let us disembark, then fix the issue, and then we will come back. They went, deliberated. 10 minutes later, they came back. They had to swallow their humble pie, and they disembarked everyone. And then they resolved it. When I reached Nairobi, I called the pilot and the whole crew, and I told them, you know what? I am from Accra, where I was doing crisis comms training to ECOWAS. There's no way I'm going all that way to sort their crisis. And you as our carrier cannot handle a small communication problem that was happening in the plane because we moved from an AC problem to a humanitarian problem. People who had issues in breathing and all that started getting worse simply because no one is communicating even as they try to do this crisis or managing it. So those are just some of the few examples that I can share up to this moment, but I can throw it back to you, Val.
Thank you. I think you have really driven the point home. Definitely understanding the difference between crisis communications and management is important. Crisis communications is definitely a tool to help you manage a crisis. So I wanted to ask, how do you identify your crisis team in an organization? Who do you need to involve in that team?
That's to Eve or me?
You can start it off and then Eunice can
No,
add.
let's Eunice go first. It's okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jacob, for that intense and very informative information differentiation between crisis communication and crisis management. So when we have to make sure that the person whom we are putting or the team that we are putting into place represent the well-being and the values of the company. All of us may have goodwill for the company, but there are values that there is value and power that some people in the organization carry, that when they speak, they are a voice of representation. And that would come, for example, a managerial position would have more credibility speaking, because when maybe we have a comms manager and a comms officer, I think if we have the comms manager speaking, it is a voice which is coming from managerial, so the people they are getting more assurance that yes, the management is in consideration of this. Number two, we also need to choose people who are able to speak with clarity, because remember when we are engaging, and especially with media, this is information that will go out there. So it's usually a slight, you can just slide slightly and again out the crisis becomes bigger, you will worsen the situation. So we also need people who are able to understand the industry that we are in. They also understand if it's the media landscape of that country, which that can happen via training, but they need to have the voice. So management usually are the best. Also, depending also on the type of crisis that's happening, because the assurance will come sometimes with the power that this person carries. For example, if the deputy president was to say something, let's say in Nyeri County, and the governor, though he's not the governor in Nyeri, he will have more power saying it. You see, because at that moment, if he says something, he is a bigger voice. So it will be weightier. That's what I'm saying. And so we need to consider, one, the person needs to have the company at heart. They need to understand the values inside out. They also need to understand the stakeholders or the media landscape in that state or in the country or in the organization where they are working, because sometimes you'll be confronted with questions that you did not anticipate. And I've been seeing that, does pressure increase or decrease, and pressure increases. So you really need to understand what you're saying, because when you've seen even in our media, when we are having, like, for example, is it the news, not the news gang, when we are having like even the Monday report, or we are having a panel and some representation, you question. So when people start questioning your credibility, you're not doing a great representation, and that will be used against you. So we really need to know the person understands what the industry they are in. I also experienced that when I was watching the housing levy, and he was grounded on TV. I think Sam Gituku and is it Yvonne? They ask hard questions, but now when you start showing emotions, especially when you're on stage, that doesn't work well also for the organization or for the public sector, because it shows you're not able to balance even your emotions, and that now becomes a misrepresentation. Another one I remember, especially in a public office level, I remember when the deputy president traveled and he said, in Kenya, we have tigers. And I'm like, okay. And so even tourists were coming to see tigers. Remember, he's a great voice in the country. If it's me or you who went to say you have tigers in Kenya, it doesn't matter. But now the person who was saying, and later he came to say that the reason as to why he was saying that is because I think in his mother tongue, tigers and leopards share the same name. And so that becomes a crisis by itself, because it becomes a misrepresentation. People may start questioning the leadership of the country. So it also needs to be a person who understands, person who knows, they are careful with their words. They're also able to, they're aware even of their own self. So you don't just put anybody there, because it may be worse if we are not careful. And now we end up worsening the situation. Yeah. To you, Jacob, you can share your input, or to Valin, back to you.
So for me, what I would say is when you do the crisis scenarios mapping, it will definitely show you who needs to be in the crisis communication team. For example, if one of the crises you envision is data breach or hacking, you need an IT person in that team. Of course, you have the HR person to handle the HR elements in case of injury to staff and all that, who communicates to their family. That one is called a family liaison. And then if there's need to speak to the media, who is the media liaison? In that case, it could either be the comms person or the company CEO. There's somebody who has asked a very good question. What do you do with a CEO who defies advice? One thing about the crisis communication plan, it's that it is a tool that is developed that needs to be endorsed by the CEO. Like the one we are developing for ECOWAS has to be endorsed by the president of the commission. So we'll be going back there for them to ratify with the Council of Ministers and to endorse it so that they bind themselves to the statutes of whatever you have put in that crisis communication plan. So that way, it is not just ideas, because they will say, this one isn't a story, Jamba. Let me say what I want to say. No, you have to bind them by that tool. It's not just something that is not, it's a living document. And it's a living document that you have to always review. Every time you have done an intervention, you've made a statement, You do media monitoring and social listening. How is the public looking at it? Then meet back with the CEO. This is the message we crafted. This is what we sent out. There's some misinformation or miscommunication in one or two areas. We can correct it in the next communique, and then you do that. You saw that during the crisis time, the COVID time, where the minister always kept on making statements each and every 1 hour of updates and giving people daily updates. That is the type of proactive crisis communication that you need to have, where you are making interventions, you are monitoring the impact, and you are changing tact. So you always have to be honest with the CEO and back it by data. For example, if they say something and it is trending, you pull it from the social listening and show them, hey, this is what was said, and this is the kind of reactions we are getting. Look at the reach, look at the sentiments. Are they negative? Are they neutral? Are they positive? You can't argue with data. So that is how you counter a CEO or a president who does not listen when you tell them. So you meet them with facts and data that you can't argue with them. This thing is trending. 50,000 people are talking about it. 40% are pathetic. The other 60% are negative. We need to do something. So as a practitioner in comms, you always have to back yourself up with data. That way, no one will rule you out. We also work a lot with people in the development state, in the development world. And I've seen one of the questions they're asking, like they always leave the crisis management to the office people. No, that has to be taken up by everyone. I will give you an example. In one of the arms of ECOWAS, there's the election, the arm, the one that monitors elections in these country member states. And in those ones, there are people on the ground whose work is to inform the big guys whenever they see something at the first instant. So this thing of being in the crisis comms team, it's not about hierarchy. Everyone, even the one who is on the ground, they will be in the position to verify that a crisis is looming and notify the same. So the terminologies I'm using here are crisis comms terms, like notification, assessment, verification. Those are things that all those terminologies need a person to make them happen. It might be that watchman at the gate who will be the first to spot. And he needs to know if he spots something, whom does he notify? And the person who is notified, how does that person escalate to the facts that the person at the gate has highlighted? So that is the kind of approach we are looking at. So even in the development world, the people that, if you're doing it in the host community, the host community might have some cultural conflicts with your project. You need to have a way of monitoring, assessing, and finding out those things before they escalate. And when you when they notify you about it, or when you pick it up, instead of waiting until there's resentment from the host community, you address them early enough, and you frame the program, you restructure the lingua, and then you come back to them. Remember the issues that we said: to show care, transparency, empathy. If there is something that it was because of your oversight, they have to know that you really are sorry about it, and you are willing to make things right, and you are focused on the main goal, which is what you want to achieve in that point in time. So those are just what I would guide on. So it's not a matter of management being in the crisis comms team. It's everyone knowing their role in the process of crisis, so that if there's a crisis and it is a technical person on the ground who has noticed it, it needs to be clear how that is escalated to the highest office. And depending on the intensity, you determine how high it can get, so that we don't bombard the CEO, the crisis comms team, with everything that is happening in the company. The others that they need to have empowered their team members to be able to handle. Back to you.
Thank you, Jacob. I can see there's a hand up from Eva. Eva? I cannot hear you at all, because I've seen you unmuted. Can anyone hear Eva?
No, we
Okay.
can't hear her.
Okay. So, Eva,
Valin,
Eva,
you're muted.
yeah. Eva, maybe you can post in the chat, your question or comment. But I wanted to, you had mentioned, Jacob, that we need to empower our teams on how to notify, the respective crisis communication teams of things that could potentially become crises. So how do we, I think sometimes when we focus on crisis communications, we always focus on the external stakeholders. How do we involve internal stakeholders like our staff, our employees, our suppliers in crisis communications? And I will throw that question to Eunice.
All right. Yes, I think often we are usually threatened by externals, but yes, even internally, we may have crises that may arise. For example, for example, you're working in a big organization and now we don't have power. We are in the office and there's someone probably who was in the lift. They're just stuck. Sometimes there's also that bit. And internally we need, if for example we need to have meetings to brief, there is always some level of leadership in every organization. I believe there's some level of how every organization communicates, and internally we really need to have briefings. For example, I believe like the example that Jacob gave, before the then minister would come to give briefings, there was internal meetings for the team before coming to communicate to the external, so that we are speaking in coherence. We are all speaking one language, because sometimes you don't want information to come out from a different person, and when this person is approached, because that would be chaotic. So even internally we need to have clear communication. If you're sending out memos, informing the people, which need to be consistent and timely. That's how now internally we have to ensure that everybody is updated, so that nobody is left behind, so that the ship is sailing with everyone in it. You don't want to leave anyone behind. And I think that will also impact the organization greatly, Valin.
Thank you for that, Eunice. I'll also throw the question to Jacob to add.
Yes. So how you empower your team is to really, like what we've been doing lately, is to do trainings for crisis comms. We've done that for big organizations, even those who there's one we did like for Mastercard Foundation, but not for Mastercard, but the partner organizations that are involved in that project. Because you find they are bringing a consortium of organizations, and there's always a crisis of comms between them. So just bringing them together and coming up with a crisis comms plan and understanding what it takes to have a successful project, and handling the crisis of the overarching roles that they are having, and also others that are interlaced with each other, just to help them to develop that. So there's also the simple one of empowering with what, where, who, why, how. You know, the four W's and H in reporting on crisis, so that when somebody comes, even if it is a rumor, they have to tell you where from, and who did it, and where was that, as in the basics that you can start now verifying that. There's a question that I've been asked: what are the best crisis comm strategies? There is none, because the crisis come fast and furious. I'll give you an example. At Media, we are the company that handled the Nairobi Expressway, pre-launch, launch, post-launch, the comms, everything you know about the expressway. And one of the major things we grappled with before people got the groove of it is accidents on the expressway. And I can tell you, it was my phone was always on speed dial, because you are called by the client. You want to eat dinner, you're told, hey, rush. There's a bus that has rammed into everything. Somebody is dead and all that. What do you do? So if you see how we handle those situations, like I can now walk you through it, because it's already passed, and now it is all said and done. Uh, we would work with the police commandant first. I would instruct them to cordon off the place. No media comes in until all lives are rescued. The good thing about me is that I'm in comms, but I'm a medic. My degree is in nursing and public health, but this is the 15th year of running at media communication. So I understand the tenets of doing triage and, the first aid, basic life support, and all those. And also client privacy. You don't want to use the expressway, you get an accident and your picture is flashed all over. I can guarantee you in those accidents that took place when we were starting, you wouldn't find picture of blood or bodies on media. Because the first thing we'll do, cordon off the place, rescue the lives and all that, then let the media come in when you're doing the wreckage. And of course, by that time, they will be angry. What are you trying to hide and all that? Our strategy was simple: transparency. Just give me the clip, give all media to see what they happened, and everyone would see it is not witch doctors that are happening on are doing stuff on the road for people to die. It's a drunken driver who came running and didn't slow down and something like that. So when you put it out there, and you put it in all honesty, you have not tried to hide anything. You've given them the numbers of everyone injured and all that. But again, the most important thing in all this was to manage the crisis. So sweeping and making sure the scene is restored and business is restored and normalcy. And guess what was trending every time that would happen? By morning, people are talking of how fast the scene of accident was restored, not how many people were injured or how many people died. And that is how the expressway is now today being used by 95,000 users a day. It's because of that kind of crisis communication and management that we've been able to do over time that would make people trust that their privacy will be guarded even as they use that road. Even if they get an accident, they know they'll not be splashed out there. We will manage that crisis. So that's just an example. So there's no best crisis communication. We were also handling the one Meta was having, the court case litigation they were having with the content moderators last year. And the strategy then was different. There was no talking to the media. It was publishing your statement and your truth and putting it on the blog of your website. Then the media would pick it up from there. Then we would change also whenever media would reach for comment, we would give them our side of the story so that they can give a balanced story. So there's no favorite tactic. If you go into the theory, I hate theory, by the way. That's why I'm really putting practicals and scenarios that we deal with as a company to solve our client issues. When you go into the theory part, you will see the various theories of crisis come. The apologia, the others that are saying you do not accept liability, others are saying you just apologize and let things cool. Others are saying deny, 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 do not take liability, and all those. All these are theories, and there are there are living experiments with whatever comes your way. So you really have to know the organizational culture, reputational damage that is at stake, the cost of silence, and the cost of whatever messaging you're putting out. Because remember, during a crisis, no communication is also communication. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So you really have to think through everything that you're doing. But there's nothing like the most ideal because every crisis presents itself with a different scenario. We are dealing with a couple of them right now with our clients, which I can't disclose because of these are things that are going concern. But I can tell you there is no one client that we've ever sorted similar to another. We are having one that we are sorting in a case of litigation, and it's different approach from whatever we did with the Meta content moderators. So these are all different scenarios that you'll always adopt a different way to be able to resolve them. Yeah.
And to add to what maybe Jacob has said on the question that you had asked about empowering your team, one of the things that we also need to communicate clearly as comms teams is feedback channels. Sometimes we forget, and it places us in a very tricky situation because sometimes people have questions but they don't know who to ask. So as we empower the internal teams, let's also create a clear communication on what are the feedback channels that will be used, and who is the person who will maybe respond to them, because that is important so that people don't sit with anxiety. Sometimes there need to be that clear communication. Back to you, Valen.
Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, Jacob. I think some of the key points that we've gotten in crisis communications right now is transparency is important, clear communications, and also taking ownership, because I think sometimes organizations want to blame if it's employees or someone else, but taking ownership is very important in crisis communications. So Eva, I remember your hand was up. Please unmute so that we can know if your sound has been sorted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I like the conversation so far. I just wanted to chip in the identification of potential risks and doing a threat test. Some of the things that we can do or professionals can do, and I think also Dorothy has alluded to that in the chat, is trying to see where other departments, working together with other departments within the organization, in identifying potential risks and where they can occur and how you're going to mitigate them. And I think for organizations that have a risk management function, an enterprise risk management function, they're key stakeholders for comms teams as well as PR teams, because they have, they maintain a risk register of all the potential risks that would happen for any business unit within the organization. And by identifying these risks, then the comms team can come in and see how and rank them, maybe as highly, medium, or low risk, and try and craft messages around that. Should this happen, should a fraud case happen, what would be the implication to our organization, and what sort of communications will we craft around that? So one thing, liaise closely with your compliance and risk management teams, because they should be our very, very good partners, because they have an overview of all the potential risks for the organization. And when considering also the communications, crisis comms teams, I think legal is also a good, is a critical factor in considering the members, just to get a view of the legal implications of what the risk is, as well as the responses that we give. That's just what I wanted to add. You can probably take Kevin's question. I saw his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Eva, for that. Kelvin, your hand was also up. Please unmute. Kelvin? I'm not sure if he's dropped off the call or not. It was Kelvin Jomo, right? Kelvin, I can see you've unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Okay. So we'll just move on to the next question, or let me just collect some questions that I've seen in the chat. I think the question of, I think I can see a question here by Dorothy. What channels are the best for communications, and how do you settle on the one to go with? I think we can start off with Jacob.
Sorry, come again?
What channels are the best for crisis communications, and how do you settle on which one to go with?
Channels are usually also very amorphous. It depends with the crisis, and it depends with the stakeholders that you're addressing. Because when you do something called stakeholder mapping, there's the level of importance that you ascribe to your stakeholders and know how to communicate to them about crisis. There is no way you have a project funder and you want them to learn about something through social media. You have to communicate different to them than the general public. So what comms will you adopt for your funding or your project partners? The general public, whom are you targeting? Is it something that happened on social media? Or let me give you an example. Take even Expressway. There were so many adverts that people would curate to say, come for an interview to be toll attendant, yet they were all fake. You can't go to radio to address that. You just take that poster, put fake on it, and post it on your official social handle, and it addresses that crisis. So the crisis itself dictates what channel you will use to first communicate through it. There are those that you can't sit pretty, you have to set up station. If it is a building that has collapsed or a fire incident or all that, you have to set up a desk for media information and also for information for family so that family members can be updated on what is happening and get all the information from that desk. And the media can also set up and have a press statement officially from you. So the channel is dependent on whatever crisis it is. If the crisis is internal of something that is brewing, you have to use internal channels to communicate the same. I remember 2 weeks ago, a client had mentioned that there was some unrest in factories that their staff were working, but they are all safe. And I asked them, have you communicated to all the other staff in the other parts of the country that are not there? They said, no, we just handled the situation and it has diffused. But I told them, no, you need to do a memo so that they don't pass it as a rumor. You need to own that there was a operational risk that took place, but it has been managed and handled, and reaffirm your commitment to your staff that you will always care for their welfare. Because if you don't do that, you will handle the crisis, but no one will know you handled it. So they will think you don't care. The channels are dependent on the nature of the crisis. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And throw a question to Eunice. So how do we measure the impact of crisis communications, both internally and externally?
Thank you, Valin. So usually sometimes we have, or not even sometimes, we should have monitoring tools, which will now, for example, help us measure the impact. So if you are working on external communication and now you see several media mentions, I'll give you an example. During the parliamentary proceedings, we were working with a client, Uber, and Bolt happened to say something in a meeting in the proceedings. And when it went into the paper, it indicated that Uber has threatened to leave the Kenyan market. Now that became a crisis for us because it's Bolt which had said this, but now Uber has its name out there saying that we are leaving Kenya. So we had to act and really try to communicate clearly. And now this where you're liaising in this fast moving pace. It's where things are happening so fast. If it's publishing, it's happening at a snap of a finger, things are happening. So I think you need to have the monitoring tools now, for example, that you would use media mentions, how we would identify where is this story going or where is the fire hottest. We had our media monitoring tools that we would use, and then see the mentions, and now that would help you to go. If it's tier one that we are dealing with, we knew who to call, we knew who to engage, and now also see how we lower this. If it's internal communication, you could have like a feedback or surveys, a survey to really hear what people are saying. You could also use what Jacob had mentioned. Sometimes it's social listening. You're listening to what is going on, and that will inform also a lot of your decisions, so that you're able, because when you're also doing crisis communication, you usually have key performance indicators of success. So you need to have now those tools depending on how or the intensity of the crisis and the type of the crisis. We need to that's what you will use to determine the success. So it's also dependent on the type of crisis, also if it's internal, if it's external, and the industry that you are in. And also sometimes it can also come via feedback. There is feedback that people will share. If you're trying to monitor online, there is feedback that you'll get from, if it's an online audience, and if the channel that they're using is, let's say, Twitter or Facebook, you'll be able to monitor. Using the monitoring tools, you'll be able to know how did we succeed, because now also the narrative, how is the narrative morphing, how is it changing, is what we are trying to communicate being consumed by the people that we are targeting? Are we communicating clearly that they are speaking the same language as we are? So having your goal set from the beginning and at the end will also help you know how successful are we. But I don't think we have a specific there is no specific way because every case is unique, but I think tools will really assist, and now also listening to what is going on, social silently, just monitoring what's going on and the feedback. Yeah, so that's what I would say from my end. Back to you, Valen.
The other thing I have to say is as a comms practitioner, you need to really cover your back during crisis. And the only way you can do that is by keeping records. So you use this crisis comms tool to cover your back, where you start with notification, who notified about the crisis, then who verified that. And then if there was any verification done and approved, you curate the messaging. Who approved it? You have to put it down on that tool, the person who approved. Remember to also put the timings there so that now when you get to the end and you evaluate, you can know where you went wrong and see how to improve it. And maybe say, maybe we need to shorten the notification period from 2 hours to 15 minutes or to 5 minutes. Maybe we need to convene a crisis comms team meeting within the first hour of a crisis. So those are the things that you'll always go back to when you have a paper trail of how you manage the crisis. And you put it even in the report. At the end of the month, you have this crisis that happened. This is how it was handled. And these are the messages that were sent out. This was the monitoring that was done and all that. And you report it back to the stakeholders. That way you cover your back because being a comms person, you can always carry the heavy load. You've seen how state house or government spokesperson have had to carry the heavy lifting of the things government or state house does. They have to always figure out how to use words to come out of a situation that actions put people in. And you don't want to get yourself in that without paper trail. So always have your paper trail and keep records for the purpose of reference when the chickens come to roost, because they will.
Also, Jacob, you've said something very important. You realize sometimes we may assume that communicating, sometimes word of mouth, and you may assume that you've communicated. As a comms person, always ensure you're using the official communication channels so that you're safe. They say if it's not on record, it was never said. So always ensure that you're using the official communication channel so that yes, you have a cushion. If it's an email, WhatsApp, sometimes we communicate via it, but sometimes it's not official communication. It's not outlined as the official communication of the organization. Always remember to put your communication on. If email is the official communication channel, ensure you always do that. And because even a client will ask you, sometimes I've been in situations where the client is, where are the emails that you did? So always remember to do that. It's something I've learned the hard way, because sometimes you think that you spoke it, but you never, it's not on record, then it was never said. So be careful on that.
Thank you for that. I think even me, during my brief stint in agency, I learned the hard way WhatsApp is not official communication. So there was this question by George about people in the development communication space. Sometimes they really don't focus on impact communications. They focus mostly on project donor publicity and impact communications, that they rarely do think about crisis management communications. So he asks, would you advise a change of tact and embed a crisis communications plan within the project communication strategy?
Yes, I actually responded to that.
Yeah, I wanted to add some context to it before you respond, because you had responded and I actually kind of preempted when I was asking the question. I hope I am audible enough. You see,
Yes, you are.
when in development world, maybe and I'm sure you know this, you find that there are the core team for the company. Let me take like for lack of a better example, let's take, for example, Deloitte. There is the core Deloitte team, but if they win a donor project, they hire a project staff who are going to work specifically for that project, and they want to, when you deliver that project, your expiry date within Deloitte is the end date of that project. And so when we move in and we start putting our comm strategies in place, we are just thinking about how to communicate impact for this project. And really, I only care about the donor of that project. I want to communicate as per their strategies and everything. And really, will I ever think about, whatever crisis happens in the process of implementing the project. And if it happens, because it has happened before in projects I've worked in, then we find ourselves running to the core comms team for the implementing company to try help us tap into the company crisis communication plan to manage that crisis. Over.
Yes, actually, during your inception meeting into that project, when you are presenting your implementation plan and the impact communication strategy, crisis comms plan is also supposed to be part of that, so that you outline the type of crisis that you expect to encounter in the project and outline also the resources within their organization who would be part to assist during those crises. Because if you don't have that brainstorm session and discuss that at depth, because there's always something called the QCs and the risk mitigation plan in every proposal that you do. That needs to graduate from just risk mitigation to a crisis comms plan, especially if the nature of the project is sensitive, which is always all the projects of such nature. You always present your impact comms and crisis comms plan side by side, and you let them fill in whichever gaps that there are in your crisis comms plan with names to that crisis comms team that would assist you to properly execute your mandate. I hope that responds to you, because no one will ever castigate you for coming up with a tool that you need resources from their side in terms of the personnel with whom you can escalate matters if they need to be resolved, and also any practitioners that you may need on standby, be it legal or whoever. You always need to have them in advance. Like, you need the client to have that thought process that this might be needed if this happens. We don't say that it will happen, but if it happens, this would be needed. There's a question that has been asked. Forgotten this final. There's a last question. Let me just open. What do you do? Yes, I said when I started that the crisis comms plan is a living document. It's not a final document that you've developed the plan and now that's it. No, the last stage of crisis communication plan is usually evaluation and re-strategy. So you always evaluate if it is working, then you go back to the drawing board. If it did not work, what did it work? Is it that the media is not working? Do we now need to be more proactive on the ground? Is saying we care no longer working? Now we need to show that we care and move from just the comms to actually having visuals to prove whatever we are saying. So those are the kind of things you have to assess. So this is not a complete document. It's always a living document. And also in that crisis comms plan, there is always, when you review it, you have to put it on record. It has been reviewed by so and so on this date, so that this protocol has been changed owing to this certain outcome. So it has been revised. So if, for example, the notification period was 1 hour and it landed you in trouble, you can go back and revise it and put that it has been revised after this, so and so revised it on this day. Now the notification period is 5 minutes. That is how you go about it. It's a living document. It's not a complete one. It always evolves with the crisis, and you always pick lessons and to carry those lessons to the next. Yeah.
And to add on what Jacob you said, I think in one very live situation that's happening, it's what we are experiencing at the moment, right? It's government and Gen Z, something that probably was not anticipated, and it's taking a whole life of its own. And today, something very intriguing that I observed is when they had a USSD for you to access services if you are hurt during the protest. And I think if someone was doing like crisis comms for government, I think that is where you have to keep moving, and you can't be on a static plan. You're fixated, but even the people that, or the audience that you're communicating with, it's a matter of seconds. Things are changing. Their solutions may not even sometimes be incorporated in your document. So it's things we have to keep working on, working fast, because it's just a matter of a tweet. It's just a matter of somebody just observing, which I observed yesterday when the Kenyans on Twitter were saying that there are celebrities who are not commenting on this finance bill. And now that, I think if they didn't have any crisis comms plan, that would really affect the brands that they represent. And I think now it's where the people, they are being forced. So if you are, for example, a brand, if a celebrity, we are looking at them as a brand at this moment, and they don't have that plan, communication plan, the crisis communication plan, I think it may not be so well with you. So I think we have to keep thinking very fast, and integrating also generations in our teams, because there is just an eye that probably we may not have, been maybe because of generational gaps or generational differences. So it's a really new development where you have to keep moving, keep the teams together, so that you're also aware of the trends that are happening. And nowadays, it's not even about trends in 2024. It's a matter of trends that may take place today and change the whole scope of work. Yeah, back to you, Valen.
Thank you for that, Eunice. I really love the comment about including different generations. As a member of the Gen Z, I think we really do need to be included in this crisis communications, because we're a different type of consumer, a very educated, we are focused on sustainability. So it's important to involve us in these conversations. So I'd like to open up the room to questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, as well as raise your hands. So while you guys think of your question, I'd like to ask, in this digital era where misinformation can be spread so quickly, how do we use crisis communications to mitigate that and get ahead of it? So we can start off with Jacob and then go to Eunice.
So the thing about it is to know about, in fact, in this type of AI, you really have, there's some deep fakes that can really deceive you to be real, but they're not. So you really have to do your monitoring well and fact checking. That monitoring component of crisis comms is very important. So that if there is a mention, like we do for all our clients, when there is a negative mention or something, a report of some sort, and it is not accurate, you are quick to do a rejoinder or a communique that debunks whatever has flown out there before it goes too far. So that by the time it's going around, people can come to your pages and see that it's indeed fake news. Fake news are usually they're usually very rampant, especially during political action, like right now. I'm also proud to say, like, we are the ones who are developing the communication strategy for Power 254, who are taking lead in the finance bill, reject finance bill 2024. And you can see how communication is a tool. It's a very powerful tool. You can use it to drive change. You can use it to quell trouble. You can use it to create a lot of trouble. You can use it to, like, you can see how the crisis comms was done by Power 254 indeed, with the clear communication, like no alcohol, no weapons, we will not be violent, we will be peaceful. Those were measures to handle any crisis before it comes. Because they know if you want to advance such a cause that is so just, what are the threats? The threats are hooligans. The threats are people who are drunk. The threats are people who would want to vandalize. So let us make our communication so clear and make it so attractive for the Gen Zs that they will feel safe to come, where their only threat will be the cops. That's why you're just told handkerchief, water, and, walk in a group. Do not walk alone. Because in all these crisis and risk assessments, the police was the final risk that there was no response to. and you just have to now deal with them as they shall come. But in terms of people's conduct and all that, you can see how they have really managed it well. And you can follow it live or even be there, and you're seeing very decent, educated, exposed citizens joining this mass action, even with the threat of tear gas and police brutality. But that is the power of communication. When you do it right, you can really advance your cause and meet your objectives. Yeah.
Eunice, anything to?
I thought I was alone.
No, we are together, Jacob, to the end. But I think one of the things in this digital era we can't really that are available for us. We can't say that out. And now we have to act with transparency.
Sorry, you were just breaking on our end, but you can continue. It's okay.
Sorry. So I was saying in this era of digital media, it's where speed and transparency really matters. And we can now separate. There is the place for traditional media, but now we have to work collaboratively so that we are integrated in the whole system. So that if it's the website, we have posted in real time. If it is for media, we are working with media on their digital platforms. And unfortunately, sometimes clients use it and it has its own clientele, but newspaper now may really be news which are late sometimes. And I think you find it a bit easier to just click and use the digital platforms more than the old media. So I think in the digital era, it's a matter of integration, working together and working with speed so that we are proactive, because also you may sleep with a crisis today and tomorrow morning it has morphed into something else. Number two, I think it's being very sensitive, especially if you are a brand or an organization. Be sensitive with what you're saying. Read it and read it again, because you will see, for example, when we have brand like what was happening with Kate actress. Look at her, she's a brand. Something that she said before has come to haunt her, and now in this generation it's just a matter of someone driving an agenda and they're like, can we boycott her products? What does that mean? It's her life as a brand ambassador that's at risk. So also, if we are big on brands, we ought to advise also maybe clients or the people we are working with, because now you no longer belong to yourself. The moment your life is out here into the public, whatever happens, if whether it's something like a divorce, now that's when you're focusing on maybe a person or as an individual. Whatever they say and you're a public figure can be used against you. So in the digital era, be very careful with what you say and what you put out there for people to consume. But far much and beyond, let's work collaboratively, integrated in all the channels, because anything can come out from any channel and we have to work together. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, integrating digital channels in this day and age is very important to get ahead of any potential crises. I can see Kelvin has his hand up. Kelvin, please unmute and share your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My microphone. Can I call it a crisis now? Thank you so much, Eunice and Jacob. You are giving us very practical insights, and I thank the organizers of this webinar. It has, Zoom, whatever. It has happened a time when Eunice and Jacob, I would wish them to tell me whether it is are we dealing with an issue, a situation, an incident, or a crisis. Number two is when can a company refuse to take responsibility in case of a crisis? Thank you so much.
If I can respond to you, when can you refuse to take responsibility? When you say that a company, in my world, that can be anything because we we do a lot. We do a lot across the continent. I'll give you an example. Like we support the EU in Somalia in strengthening maritime security there, and the issue of pirates. We are sorting ECOWAS in West Africa with all the issues that are happening. We have governments that we are helping in comms and PR, and multinational organizations that we are helping in various crises. Now, that question of when can an organization refuse to take responsibility, it depends with the crisis. If your boss has been caught with nodes that are circulating, the company cannot come to apologize on behalf of the public. You have to delink that so that it becomes a personal issue and it is handled in his personal space so that the company's mandate is not, or reputation is not tagged on that incident. As much as it will always come back, but you cannot start apologizing for that as a company because you did your measures to recruit that person. That's just one example. So it really depends with the crisis. Again, that's where I come back to because the crisis will determine if it is an act of God. You don't take responsibility. You show empathy, but you don't take responsibility for an natural disaster. You can only show empathy and support your teams and your stakeholders through it, but you can't come out and say we are taking responsibility. Another thing is if the crisis has a legal nature, you do not take responsibility because the moment you take responsibility, you have basically you have condemned yourself before you're even taken to court. So what you always do is to always show empathy and not necessarily taking responsibility until you consult legal and they advise you accordingly. That's when you can now decide that there is no legal exposure to this. And if there is an exposure, it is limited to this amount. So therefore, we can take responsibility. But you don't take responsibility unless advised by your legal and HR about it and proceed with that. So that's how I can guide. And then if you're asking whether this is now in the levels of crisis, this is highly intense. Highly intense crisis is one that has spilled over the streets. The media is covering it. Now international media are covering it. And it's turning violent by the day. And the discussion is gaining momentum, more and more momentum. There is mass action. I mean, it can't get this bad. It can only get worse, but already things are bad. And something really needs to be done because it will just take something small to tip it. You remember, like the Arab Spring, it just took one person to tip the scale. You see, like the incident of the policeman. Thank God it was the policeman. I say thank God in quotes that it was the policeman whose hands were, blown by that tear gas. What if it was one of the protesters? You can imagine now a peaceful protest would now have stirred some animosity and it would have moved from a peaceful protest to now protest against police brutality. And that is what you want to avoid. So we are in a very dicey situation right now. And how the government handles the situation, I hope they can really, really listen to the professionals who deal with these things on a large scope, on a multinational scope. When we tell them you need to do something, you really need to fix your comms because the person who is handling your comms, whenever a crisis comes up, really, really needs to relook at where they went to, which school of thought they come from. Because I, at times, really find it pitiful that at some pronouncements that are made in a time where a country needs to be inspired with confidence and belief in patriotism. Yes.
To add on what Jacob you've said, I think if you look at Kenya as a very significant country in Africa and also being a strategic position or even a brand, basically brand Kenya, it's at risk at the moment. And you can look even at how many businesses are affected by whatever is going on. And when you look at Kenya, beyond that, looking at it as a country, if you look at it as a brand, if maybe there were travels that were scheduled, sometimes they'll be interfered with by what is going on. So yes, I would say echo just what Jacob has said. It's intensifying, because I would also say it's live, because tomorrow we don't know what we will wake up with. I think today it was the mother of mothers demos, and I think when you see a state turning that way, that is total crisis.
Thank you both for the comments. I don't know if Kelvin has any follow-ups to that.
Oh, thank you so much.
There's actually something like you see right now. The crisis now has moved from the street to the, what do we call it? The global sphere. Because like right now, Parliament website is not working, and you saw there was a notification by some people called Anonymous, and right now I've just seen a notification that their website is not working. You see, this crisis is continuing to just escalate. You don't know where it will hit next. Recently, eCitizen was hit so bad we couldn't access it, and it was ascribed to some dispute with Sudan. So you always want to manage a crisis when it is brewing rather than belittling it. I know some practitioners believe in saying, oh, the impact is not much, it will fizzle out, but you don't know what would happen next or which tact, because people always adapt and adopt and adapt to the kind of response that you give them. If they don't see you as responsive, they will do measures that will make you respond. So they really want to handle this crisis and communicate properly even as they do that.
And Jacob, I think it's gotten even worse, because now beyond even going to the country, even the individuals are getting quite affected. And I saw ODPC trying to come in today morning. I read the tweet of ODPC, what they were saying, and the following tweet was, kindly call her. This is her contact. And she's saying, if you put people's contact, you're interfering with privacy. And now what I saw was, I think, a policeman who was captured yesterday. I think he was quite hard on a protester. And they said, I think a conversation, because also the emotional state that the nation is in, there is a lot of negative.
I think we've lost you again. Val, am I the one who is gone, or we've lost
Yeah,
Lucy?
Eunice,
I mean, Eunice.
Eunice, I think we've lost you.
Oh, I don't know where we were, but then I was saying about the policeman, and I saw the conversation going on that we want to know his family. We want to know his daughter. And I thought, what does that mean even to individuals in the country? So you can see it's getting intense. It's not becoming better. It's becoming a bit murky. So I think the better plan that is implemented, or how best this crisis is managed, even the better for other people's lives. I was worried when I remember that night when Twitter was full of the MP's numbers, and I think a conversation was running, and it is said that, can you share their parents' numbers as well? And we thought, when you share a parent who is like 70 years old, honestly, what is that doing? So it is going further than just a political affair. I think it is affecting lives intensely, and the narrative, the agenda is changing by day. So I cannot prevent further damage, because damage is already happening. So yes, that's it from my end.
Thank you for that. What you've said about escalation, if you fail to respond, things do escalate. I think we can see with the protests, they started as reject the finance bill, and now it's Ruto must go. So you can see how that has escalated to new levels. Eva, yeah, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you for that, Val. And I think one of the things that we're learning is that our audiences have a bigger influence than we tend to think they do. And so sometimes you find that it's not about the truth, but who the people believe. So if I am for Bonnie, anything that they say, whether it's a lie or not, that sometimes that's what I believe. It's not really about whether it's right or wrong. And I think that's something we need to be very careful about when handling crisis comms. But I had a question just before we wind up. As a leader, if you're leading a comms team or a crisis comms team, what are some of the things, how do you handle your team in a situation where you're under pressure as the leader from management, for example, and there's also external pressure when you're addressing an issue or a crisis that's touching on your organization? How do you ensure also you're not passing on the unnecessary pressure and tension to your teams when handling the situation in a manner that they are not able also to deliver effectively?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I'll first start with a comment that you made. When you do stakeholder mapping, there are four quadrants. You know, there are those who are lowest interested in your work and they have the lowest influence. And there are those who are highest interested and highest influence. Then there are those who are moderate, there are those who have high. So when you do that XY axis and you put the quadrants, you always have to know that somebody can move from the same way a crisis can start from minimally intense to highly intense, is the same way a stakeholder can move from low interest and lowest influence to highly impactful. Like recently, you've seen some youth who become like the face of this movement. And there were nobodies in quotes like 2 days ago. They've moved from a quadrant of lowest interested in politics, like that is how the government used to look at Jay-Z. These are the lowest interested and the lowest impact because they have that notion the Gen Zs don't vote and they do not protest. So for them, they would just want to sort the ones who are maybe in the informal settlements and all those. So long as those are happy and they cannot go to Mandamanos, they can do whatever they want. But now the Gen Zs have moved from that quadrant of lowest interested in politics to the lowest impact to now the highest interested and highest impact. I mean, they're bringing and grounding everything to a halt, even in the hometown of the president himself. So that's what happens when you don't handle a crisis well or when you undermine a stakeholder in your stakeholder mapping. Now, when you get yourself in a crisis and there's intense pressure, that is what we call a crisis because a crisis will always have pressure and the pressure comes from all corners. And that's why you have to plan it well and select your team well. So that in that moment of crisis, you remember why you selected your team. They all have different strengths they bring to the table. Can they handle what they are strongest in so that you handle what you are strongest in? If yours is to handle the stakeholder management with the, let's say you are a CS, you are handling the comms with the president and you're making sure things don't get dicey. You always have to put the pressure on your team to deliver because that's why you selected them in the first place. If you are a company CEO and your product is struggling, another one has been launched and yours is struggling, you have to put pressure on the comms and the marketing team to come up with turnkey concepts that are going to give you back an edge. So this thing, there's nothing like no pressure with crisis. Those two always go together. High pressure, stress, crisis. And that is when now it starts you to action. Never think that there's a minimal crisis as a crisis comms team that it will come to you and it doesn't have the capacity to escalate. So do not underestimate crises. All of them come with stress, but trust your team. Remember why you selected them and you assign them roles. Make sure they play the roles you assign them to. If one is a spokesperson, let the spokesperson be the spokesperson. If you're not good on camera, do media training. It will help you if you're the spokesperson and you have not done media training, you're in trouble. So you need to do that to prepare you. You have seen situations where a PS of finance or a PS of health has been thrown under the bus where they go to the media and they're sweating bullets. They are not speaking anything coherent. It all goes down to media training and preparation in times of such crisis. If you know you are in a you are under anyone who is powerful, or you are in a powerful position that will require you to come in front of the camera, do media training and on-camera training. It will help you a great deal. Over to you, Val.
Thank you. Eunice, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
I think also it's where we learn to share the necessary information, and sometimes it may be tricky to identify what is necessary and what is not, but I think that's why you're together with that team. I think sometimes the challenge in top management, unfortunately, is delegation and trusting that your team will be able to implement or do what they do. We ought to trust them and avoid blame game, because now the moment now you start blaming one another, this one was supposed to do this, and you start shifting course, and when you're working with a disgruntled team, the results may not be very impressive, because now everybody is like working against each other. So I think the best is really, when now a crisis comes, you are under pressure, understand that also everybody could be going through the same. So it's where you're calling for a lot of trying to be sane in that whole situation, trying to find balance. I think now this is also your well-being as a person comes in, so that you're not ranting out of your emotions, or these people don't want to say something that may be used against you, knowing that if you're the spokesperson, if you're the lead person, you need also to treat the people that you're working with a lot of respect, because they are your team, and it can also, it's a matter of minutes, and that also works against you. So under pressure, I think also consider that you're not the only one who is going through that. The whole team could be going through that. So the best is to try your best to lessen the stress that everybody could be experiencing, so that we all work towards the same goal. Let's keep having review meetings. How did that go? What do you think we can do better? So we have to keep communicating. Try to avoid now to build more tension during that circumstance or situation, because it will make it worse. So everybody is working with fear. Everybody is worried. I don't want to do this. Maybe I'll be found. I don't want to take the blame. I think there come a time, and now if you have to take the shots as the lead, is where you take the bullets for your team, and really try to work out things so far, so that we still speak in the same language and try to support one another. We need a lot of team support, especially during those situations, so that we can burn out, but let's burn out as a team, not alone. Yeah. You're on mute, Valen.
Thank you, Eunice, for that. So we're very past time. I think this conversation, it's not easy to exhaust it. So I think at this point, I would like to conclude the webinar. Thank you so much to our speakers, Jacob and Eunice, for giving us your time. And thank you for everyone who joined in, who shared the questions. This has been a very engaging session. I'll be sharing the LinkedIn profiles of our speakers in the chat, so that you can reach out to them for, a side chat, further conversations, or just to network with them. So let me hand over to Eva, our chapter lead for TCA Kenya, to give the closing remarks. Once again, thank you to our speakers and the audience.
Thank you very much, Val, and everyone who took their time to join the session. For those who are part of our community, we are the Comms Avenue Kenya Chapter. We have a network of around 500 members, that is just within Kenya. And some of the things that we are passionate about with the Comms Avenue is empowering professionals. And sometimes sharing experiences is better than reading the concepts in papers, in articles, and in videos. Sometimes when you see a real person and speaking about something that you're also struggling with, brings the point more home, and you feel like you belong, and that the struggle is not just for you. So we have these sessions on a monthly basis. We call them our peer learning sessions, where we gather professionals to just share their experiences within their areas of expertise, whether it's internal comms, whether it's media relations, crisis comms, like the sessions that we just had. So how we arrived at this was that we did a small needs assessment survey amongst our members, and they indicated some of the areas that they're struggling with, and that is what we are trying to address through the webinars. And I hope that we'll have more and more of you joining the sessions, and also give us feedback if you need certain topics to be discussed and you're more aligned to them and you'd like to get more information and like to connect with more professionals, please let us know and give us feedback on how best we can do them. We do this on a monthly basis, but it's going to be virtual. We do them on a virtual, and it's free and available. So you can let your colleagues know, you can let your friends know who are in the comp space, that they can join us. Val has shared their LinkedIn profiles. You can also follow the Comms Avenue on LinkedIn just to get updates on when we are having our next one. But we also have a WhatsApp community where we share the events that we'll be having. I'm very, very grateful to our speakers who took their time to share their knowledge and experience with us. And I hope we'll continue to connect more and share our experience as well as professionals within the comm space. I see it's almost 9 p.m. I hope that we can now have a restful night after a very eventful day. We'll catch up online and virtually together with the rest of the members. Thank you so much. Let us know if you have any feedback, please let us know, and so that we are able to improve these sessions for you. Have a good evening, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.